Hey, well, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for our March webinar. Today we're going to be hearing from Kathleen Barron and Ann Muller and Melody Alcazar. They are with the Cities Connecting Children to Nature project here in Austin and work. I'll let them introduce themselves in just a moment. But before we get started, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. So I am currently working in Austin, and as such, I'm on the ancestral and unceded land of the Tonkawa, Cherokee, and Sana people. Our ongoing colonial presence on indigenous lands compels us to take action now to counteract the effects of colonization. The work we do through the TCIN network is one small step towards that effort. I'm also going to put a couple of links in the chat on land acknowledgements and some information about the Cherokee, Sana, and Tonkawa peoples. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Ann, Melody, and Kathleen. And Melody, you should be able to share your screen.
Hi everyone, I'm Ann Muller. I'm the Outdoor Learning Specialist with the Austin Independent School District. Melody, when you screen share, do you mind sharing the Jamboard? I'm going to drop it into the chat one more time. If you haven't had a chance, we've got a couple of participants here. You can click on the link in the chat, and then on the left-hand side, you can see a little toolbar, and the fourth one down is a sticky note. And you can click on that sticky note and then pick your color, and you can type in what you're hoping to get out of this session today. Someone's hoping to learn how to use a tool like this. We're going to give you lots of information around that today, and then help with assisting schools in your area. And we'll show you how this assessment really has helped us to do that in Austin. So hopefully it'll be a good tool for you to use as well.
And Ann, does that look okay on your end?
It does, yeah.
That looks great.
We'll maybe come back to this. And if you prefer to drop your feelings about what you're wanting to get out of this session into the chat, we can do that. Just gives us some guidance to make sure that we lead into this, making sure that we touch on points that you're looking for. I introduced myself. I'll let Kathleen and Melody introduce yourselves.
Okay. Hi, I'm Kathleen Barron. I'm the Senior Programs Manager with Austin Parks Foundation.
And I am Melody Alcazar, and I coordinate the Cities Connecting Children to Nature initiative for the City of Austin, and I'm housed in the Parks and Rec Department. So we wanted to start just by giving you a little background on where each of our three entities are kind of coming from this and how we have been able to work together to ultimately create this assessment tool that you'll be learning a lot about. So CCCN is actually a joint initiative between the National League of Cities and the Children in Nature Network, and they use nature as a framework for racial equity. So Austin's one of 18 cities that is part of this national cohort, and when we first were brought on in 2016, we did a handful of things like, collecting demographics, doing program scans, a ton of community engagement to really see kind of where we were as a city. And then from that developed some pretty extensive mapping that identified areas of Austin that are what we consider to be nature deficient. And that mapping kind of exercise that we took ourselves through, you'll see come up kind of again and again as part of how we have been able to implement this tool. But we have 5 priority strategies within CCCN Austin, one of which is green school parks. And so obviously that's really where we'll be focusing our efforts on today.
So Austin Independent School District is one of the partners working in the Green School Parks Initiative with CCCN in Austin. And I am the co-chair with Melody of our subcommittee that's doing this work. We have an Environmental Stewardship Advisory Committee in Austin ISD that has really set the groundwork for green school parks. through our existing sustainability initiatives in the district and some pretty robust nature goals. I'm going to share our outdated version of that plan with you. We've been in the process of updating it over this past year, and we don't have the public facing version of that, but you can check out I think it's 2018 version is now in the chat for you all to take a look at. And so we have, we're essentially host sites. We're where a lot of the kids are for this work. And so we have 2 green school parks now in Austin and another one onboarding. And we'll tell you about our assessment tool today that we used to take a look at what all of our schools have and what they need.
Hi, I'm Kathleen. I work with Austin Parks Foundation, and we're a nonprofit in Austin that really quite simply works in the parks, works to invest in the parks. And we do that through activation, investment, and a lot of our work is very community driven. And we're one of many nonprofit partners that works through CCCN, and I'm on the Green School Parks Committee, and worked on this tool, but I was one of many nonprofit partners who did. And so I kind of consider myself representing a great number of community groups and nonprofits who worked on this effort.
So we approached kind of our Green School Park initiative by starting with our joint use sites. So Austin has 22 sites throughout the city that are jointly owned between the school district and the Parks and Rec Department. And so that means that the land that school sits on, the park space, is all the school during school hours, but once school hours are over, so after school, weekends, holidays, etc., that is treated as a traditional public park. And so Parks and Rec staff go in and maintain the trash and playgrounds and do mowing. It's a little bit different for each site, of course, but generally speaking, it gave us a nice framework to kind of step into this space, to be able to do some kind of large scale improvements. And so all of the assessment work that we have done has really focused around these joint use sites, just because in our city, that's been the easiest place for us to start. What's pictured here, you can just see that we've got kind of the old version of the joint use agreement. It was last updated in 1984, so it's been a while. A lot has changed on our campuses since then. And so we're actually in the process of updating that right now. And you can see kind of a draft of that, where we're really honing in on the different ecosystem features that we're starting to see at campuses. So anything from bees to ponds to nature trails, etc. All of that is now included in our joint use agreement for those 22 sites.
So, hopefully you all have kind of a lay of the land for Austin. And now we sort of want to really dive into how we develop the tool and sort of the steps from beginning to end to give you a really good sense of all the planning and execution steps that we went through. So the first thing is, as part of the Green School Parks Committee for CCCN and working with the Children in Nature Collaborative of Austin, which is CINCA, we really worked as a team to develop and pilot this tool. And we really thought of it as something that we would, take a good bit of time to really hone and work through it. It was and is a working document, but we really wanted to have some specific goals in mind. The first one being very easy to use and accessible to use. So it's just a Word document. We felt like that's an easy thing for most people to use. We didn't want to necessarily use some specific kind of technology that not everyone has access to. We wanted to have both objective and subjective measurement capabilities. So being able to attach numbers to things, but also to have the opportunity for teachers or the principal to tell us what their impression is of what's on campus, what's not on campus, the programming, kind of their goals and their wishes. We wanted to measure both the presence of infrastructure as well as the quality, and then also is there programming around it. So there might be a garden, but is it overgrown? Is anyone using it? Is it well maintained? So we wanted to kind of look at it from a multifaceted standpoint. And we really wanted this to have the overarching goal of guiding future equitable investment of new green infrastructure. So once we have all this information, well, then what do we do with it? How do we use that to then look at, well, where is the highest need and what kinds of needs are there, and then plug in that sort of investment accordingly. And then we also wanted to be able to compare what does the campus look like now? And then if we build a green school park or we put in a few new features, what happens to that score afterward? So this is the sort of first page of the assessment. As you can see, it has whoever was at the interview, the team members that were involved, the school, and then you can just kind of really quickly see the different categories, vegetable garden, habitat garden, community garden. This is multiple pages, but we just kind of wanted to give you a sample of what it looks like. And I believe we sent the document. Everyone should get a copy of the document so you can see it at length. And then an opportunity for to show the presence of it. Is it used? What's the quality of it? And really get all the numbers and just additional, lots of room for information. Go to the next slide. And then this is where we have more of the subjective interview style questions, where we're really finding out from the school what's happening on their particular campus, what's unique about their campus. And just as something to sort of think about right now, and if you would pop it into the chat, just think about what kinds of categories do you think you would have if you were to develop a tool like this. Go on to the next slide.
So Kathleen covered a lot about, how we actually created the tool, all of the different categories. And again, you should have a hard copy with you. If not, it'll be sent at the end. But once we actually had it in hand, we then had to, go out there and use it. And so this is really where we leaned on that Green School Park Committee that we have talked a lot about so far. And so we pulled our committee together, and we spent, when we still had in-person training available, did some in-person training where we walked everyone through the document itself. And then also just went through a ton of pictures of all of the different features that we were asking folks to look at, so that they could start to get a feel of what might this look like on different campuses. As you all know, a garden looks very different depending on where you are and what is planted. And so we wanted to make sure that everyone was comfortable with the idea that even though it says vegetable garden, it may appear in many different ways depending on what campuses you're going to see. Just a little bit more background on the committee itself. So and this will help you start to think through, the different partners that might be involved in creating something like this in your own cities. Our committee obviously is made up of the three of us that are here today, a big part of that. But then we also have a lot of additional nonprofit and especially environmental focused that Kathleen kind of alluded to, that really do a lot of in-person programming at schools. So in Austin, for us, that looks like EcoRise, PEAS, a handful of others. National Wildlife Federation is a big partner for us here in the city. And then in addition to kind of those EE providers, we have a few folks that are really focused on the community side of things. So how is a community using that space? Again, since we targeted our joint use starts to begin with, we wanted to make sure that we had that voice as part of this process. And so we made sure to incorporate those community groups into these conversations as well. So that kind of comprises who actually went out there and was at these site visits and talked to these principals and looked at all these features. The kind of use of the tool itself, we had folks partner in pairs of two so that there was a little bit of accountability on what everyone was seeing. And they were asked to conduct a site visit at a school. We basically had a big long list of like, these are it, sign yourself up. And as soon as there's 2 people signed, Anne would coordinate kind of scheduling with the principal on that site visit. The visits themselves took about 2 to 3 hours. And it was, again, that combination of like physically walking the site and looking at all of the different features. And then also having that conversation with the principal and then whatever kind of point person their campus had. After kind of training everyone, and yes, you can look at pictures and they're great, we really wanted to show people in person what this might look like. And so we did a tour 2 different schools that Outside of any work that we have done, we really consider to be kind of green school parks on their own. And again, it gave us a chance to really look at the difference and how features appear on campuses. This picture on the right-hand side, I think, is a great example. There's obviously a downspout on the back of that on the building, and it's actually draining into what is technically a rain garden. But when you're kind of walking through that campus and just on that sidewalk, if you don't have a staff member there to kind of point that out to you, or maybe you haven't, been shown the way that these rain gardens appear on campus, you may not be able to include that into your assessment. So again, that in-person practice, I think, was really important for our team to get comfortable in understanding how to actually use the tool when you were on different campuses.
I have been thinking, Melanie and Kathleen, while you've been speaking, that I missed an opportunity to share a little bit of background information for the group. So I'm going to take a moment of pause to do that. For those who are unfamiliar with Austin, we have 130 schools in the district. And for this tool, we're talking about having done this assessment for around 20, maybe a little over 20. The number changes based on, we had a bond pass in 2017. So we've had some schools that are open or closed that are joint use sites that are now open or whatever. It's been kind of in flux over the last couple of years. But just so you have a sense of the scope for how many campuses we're talking about, we started with those joint use. Eventually we may expand beyond joint use in our long-term goals for this work. And then in Austin, we went into Green School Park saying we're going to identify a school that has a high need and lack of nature access in their neighborhood and install a Green School Park at that school. And so we did that at Barrington Elementary in North Austin, and we did that again at Wildridge Elementary. And there were some successes and some real challenges with that process. And us coming in and saying, let's give you a Green School Park, felt like there were actually more challenges, and we needed to take a step back and assess the landscape and see what schools have, what do they not have, what are their real needs, so that we weren't just like white saviors coming in saying, we're going to fix all of your problems by giving you a Green School Park. We still are working on supporting installation of infrastructure and still supporting those campuses and want them to be as successful as possible. But just to say that there were and are some real challenges with that model. And so this assessment is really meant for us to say, okay, if we can look at these 22 schools and see that 15 of them have a desperate need for trees, it gives us the opportunity to say, we know that they need trees. Let's see if we can find funding. Or we know that they all have vegetable gardens, which they don't, but let's say we found that out. Then how can we support their vegetable gardens? Is it getting them signed up for Garden to Cafe? Is it, do they need maintenance support? Do they need professional learning support? So we really tried to transition our approach towards how we are making Green School Parks happen in AISD. So now back to this slide. We wanted this assessment to also be an opportunity to have a real conversation with the administration, and either with an administrator or a teacher or somebody who could walk us around the grounds. And so my department, I'm in academics. I'm in the STEM department in academics in Austin ISD, and we paid substitute pay for a teacher to walk the grounds with us. At some schools, they didn't take us up on that. It was the principal that came or a parent support specialist, but many campuses did. We wanted to make it as easy as possible and not be a burden on the campus. And you can always walk the grounds and take pictures of things, but we wanted a sense of how they're used, if they're used, why they are not used. And so really being able to walk with somebody who deeply knows that school and the features was helpful to get a real narrative along with the assessment itself. I will say that scheduling was a challenge for many schools. We're only talking about 20 or so schools here, but for some, this like offer to come and pay for subs just really didn't work. And eventually I had to say, hello, Principal so-and-so, we will be at your school at this day and time and hope somebody can meet us. And that for those campuses did end up working, but just wanted to throw in there that you might go in with a scheduling plan that just doesn't work out because people have a lot on their plates. So we used this as an opportunity to do the assessment, and then we sat down with each principal for about 30 minutes. We gave them a flyer, which you'll see an example of, and asked them questions from their administrative perspective. Do they have a master plan goal? How is the community using that? How are they supporting that use as an administrator? Partially to plant the seeds for them, because some of them have not really ever thought about their role in nature connection at their campuses. And others, it was for us to really get some feedback and information about what's working and where the challenges are in the community. This is the flyer that we gave to the principals in that sit down meeting. We wanted them to get a sense of who we are and what Green School Parks is. I think that there were people who thought we were coming to like automatically give them lots of money and make things happen on their school. And so I think this was also a really good chance to say, we're actually just trying to see what you have so that we can have more collective impact and look for funding at a larger scale if we can make the case for the need at more campuses than just one. And I think that this flyer is in the materials that you'll all be getting.
So after we did our assessment work, which, you know, as you can imagine, was a pretty big coordination effort and did take some time, but we compiled all of the assessment data and photos. So, you know, we would go on site with the tool that I showed you and handwrite in everything for the most part, and then go back in and enter it into a Google sheet that we had. We had all of the sort of copies of the assessments, and then it was all entered into a spreadsheet by school. And then also add photos into different folders so everybody could see and have reference to all the green infrastructure. And we had, I mean, tons and tons of photos, lots of information there. And then we really wanted to, you know, we get all the information together, and then we all really looked at it and thought, okay, well, now really what do we had some overarching goals about how we want to use this data, but how do we really use it? And how do we make it functional for us? And really needing to create more of a scoring system that you could then compare. So the tool itself, you know, you add numbers, you add the quality, and then you sort of gave it a almost subjective sense of, is this not a green school park? You know, is this like, there's nothing going on, it's in progress, good, and, you know, really they're already there, they've already arrived, they're a green school park. And so we wanted to make sure that the numbers actually really kind of matched up with that sense that we got of the overall picture of the school. So we looked at adding up, doing like a scoring system and applying measurement to the number of amenities, the quality of amenities, and then the quality of the use of it. We also looked at professional development, need for culture change, and those were all done more from a low to high. So we wanted to be able to say, okay, I'm looking at this, they have a lot of amenities. They're all basically have crumbled into the earth. No one's used them in years. But at the campus, there's a lot of excitement and enthusiasm, and actually the principal's already applying for a number of different grants, and have that kind of give us a picture of what does that campus really need to be successful. They've got some things, perhaps they need more stewardship, a few grant opportunities because there is a supportive campus, and then that's kind of a recipe for success for them. Other campuses we'd find had really, you know, interest, and people were like, this sounds really great, but I'm sort of actually actively scared of being outside with bugs. And I mean, we had really it really ran the gamut how people felt about this. And overall, I'd say it was a positive response, but they're just, some people have a lot of experience with nature, just like we find with our kids, and some people don't. And so we really wanted to be able to look at the bigger picture and know how to respond to those campuses and how to offer them kind of a path forward. That was really the idea. And so then, you know, kind of pull all the information together. And then, you know, the last step is sort of to, you know, get back with the principals, get back with the campus and kind of talk about next steps. So here's kind of a one page of how we sort of consolidated all the information. A couple of things I want to highlight. If you see that GSP score, that's really the sort of final score that we gave while we were on site to say, you know, is this, are they in progress? Is this, you know, very low, like there's hardly anything going on here at all, up to 4, which is like really their green school park. And so then you can kind of see that the features for the most part, the quantity of the features does go up higher as you have a higher park score, but then you also need to look at the quality, because again, you might have a lot of things because well-meaning people over the years have installed various gardens or, you know, a cistern, but nobody's using it. So that's, you want to be able to look at all of those things and see how they kind of match up. And then where you can see the sort of low to high is like, is there a little bit of activation? You know, we have campuses and the challenges that Anne was talking about earlier, put in a green school park, very exciting to have this infrastructure, nobody's using it. So how do we really funnel energy into getting it activated, getting people using it, building it into the curriculum, building it into just the way that the campus works, but also how the community uses it, because these are joint use sites. These are places that the community uses as well. And then at the end, you can see Wooldridge. There's a line that says Wooldridge and then Wooldridge 2. We were able to assess it before in, I think, 2019. And then last year in 2020, we went back out to the site after a number of features had been installed, like a playground, a natural playground, outdoor classrooms, some trees. You know, there were a lot of different things installed. And so you can see that on the second assessment, they had a higher score.
So I spoke to this a little bit, and so has Kathleen, that really the analyzing of the results has now been quite a long process. It allowed us the opportunity to see where gaps exist, and there are real gaps, both in terms of infrastructure, but also in terms of park amenities, which Melody will be speaking to in a little bit. So we were able to see that, you know, some campuses have lots of trees and lots of benches or outdoor classrooms or lots of gardens. And then you go to others and it's like they have the playground and a trash can. And so it's afforded us this opportunity to say, okay, where are the gaps for our schools? We can then come in with programming support, either professional development, or we have community partners who can provide direct programming. We have had several grants that we've gotten over the last couple of years, and support from our city partners that have paid for Cave Sim or other programs to happen on campuses. And then this has really helped highlight some equity issues for us in terms of seeing some real gaps in the city at our campuses. And so equity is really the piece that's driving the work. And the campuses that scored really high on that last page that Kathleen was showing that had a 4, to be quite honest, we have been communicating with them much less than the campuses that were much lower that have some higher needs, because, you know, they're essentially green school parks already on their own, and they have a lot going on, and they're going to be a phase down the road for us where we have these much higher needs right now to help get some opportunities for kids to get outside at their schools.
So, to that end, the next steps and implications for the tool is that, again, we really think of this as a living instrument that we're constantly going back into and thinking about how can we add columns to this so that we get information that we really need from this. And also to be able to reassess sites with new features. So again, when we look back at the tool, I talked about the Wooldridge Elementary Green School Park. You can see that they have, out of a scale of 1 to 4, going from a 2 to a 3 is a big push. And I think that will continue, as we try to work to get more activation at that site. We hope to really increase that number up to 4 as people become more used to using the amenities, start to advocate for more amenities, and really just utilize them more, build on them more. So it really gave them like a great first step. And now the challenge is looking back at this instrument and thinking about, okay, well, now how do we keep this going? Because we don't want to make these investments and then have nothing come of it. We really want the sustainability aspect of it.
So in Austin ISD, we're really lucky that we have an urban forestry specialist, a district arborist, and we've been able to collaborate with him on tree planting priorities and also getting stumps and mulch for our campuses. So we have an urban forestry department in the city of Austin that has granted some rather large grants to the district over the last several years, with another one coming up this upcoming year, focused specifically on tree planting. And so we were able to take this data to him, and he actually has data on every tree in the district, their size, species, age, condition, etc. And so he was able to take his really extensive data with ours and our Green School Park priorities and integrate our priority campuses into his planting list. So that's going to be really exciting. We've got a handful of schools that are going to be on this priority list for the next year or two to get some trees going in on their sites. And then we have trees that come down sometimes on district property. Usually they're hazard trees, or there's some reason we don't just take trees out. So if a tree is needing to come out for a safety issue, we've coordinated with him that any viable stumps will either remain on campus or go to one of our identified priority campuses. Unfortunately, and fortunately, I guess, most of the trees this fall that have come out are not able to be turned into stumps. They were split or had too many issues that they weren't viable. However, the vendor that takes trees down for us, takes down great trees in other places in the city. So we have some opportunities for collaboration there. And we've done quite a bit of professional learning, both on campus during the in-service before school started, in-service days throughout the year, faculty meetings, and then I also provide district level professional learning opportunities and host partners who do professional learning. So we try to make sure that there's a robust selection for our teachers and campuses. Melody, are we talking about the principal cohort later? I can't remember.
I don't think we are. So if you want to mention it,
I'll just say something about it quickly here then. We got a Catalyst grant that is paying for an administrator, a Green Campus Administrator cohort that's through this subcommittee. We just opened up registration and have had some principals sign up today, so I'm very excited. But it'll be a year-long program with them. EcoRise is going to be facilitating that cohort and really using that as a chance to develop some of our administrators on what it means to be a supportive administrator, and to give them a space to network and collaborate, and to do some visioning and master planning for their schools. And then I spoke to this already, but this has been an opportunity for us. Oh, I skipped to the fourth bullet. Well, this has been an opportunity for us to really seek specific funding. We have commitments from some of our partners that are listed here to help support infrastructure. And then this assessment allowed us to really quickly act in terms of COVID. We knew which schools at our joint use sites didn't have outdoor classrooms or had very minimal outdoor classrooms. And thanks to our partnership with Kathleen and Austin Parks Foundation, we've been able to support those campuses in applying for mini grants that are getting stumps, mulch, and limestone blocks so that they can have up to 4 or 5 classroom spaces this spring as a response to COVID so that teachers can get outside. And then the district has approved the purchase of limestone blocks for 29 other schools that are not joint use to help provide outdoor classrooms for those spaces. So really excited about that. And then we've got just so much activation going on between our subcommittee members that provide programming. And then I alluded to this earlier, but we've had some funding for Cave Sim and Peas at some of the schools. And then Austin Batcave is oncoming with Barrington and Wooldridge to provide it's a mobile writing workshop classroom that is going to be hopefully providing some programming at those schools to get them activated.
All right, so Anne started to get into this a little bit in terms of the different funders that we've approached, and I'm really glad that she took a minute to give a little bit more background on us kind of shifting gears. You know, we've been doing this for so long that I often forget about the fact that we did it completely differently just a few years ago and have entirely changed our approach to kind of green school parks in general throughout Austin. And what I realize is kind of fuzzy on the screen. We can share a link to this, but what it wound up doing is opening our eyes to the fact that it's taken almost 5 years to get up to 3 green school parks kind of installed in a big way. But we're going into the campus and doing this large scale infrastructure installation, lots of professional development with the staff, et cetera. And it's great in the sense that the ecosystem services of those features is still being provided. But, you know, like we've talked about, you know, throughout this call, is that the culture change within that school hasn't really made much of a shift. And so the champion teachers are still the same champion teachers. They just have maybe some cooler stuff to work with now. And we wanted to kind of change how we approached going about this. And so what we wound up doing is, you know, from all of this data that we collected, we put it into, this is a spreadsheet with many tabs, so all of our information is here, but you can see that this is where we kind of culminated everything, all of the data that was pulled together, and we then presented this to funders that we knew are in support of the idea behind green school parks. And so for us, that's the Watershed Protection Department, Development Services, which manages our urban forestry here in Austin. It was the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center in terms of wildflower seeds and trying to expand meadows on campuses. And then also obviously looking at the tree priorities that Anne mentioned from the district forester. And so in addition to saying kind of this is what we found from our data, we wanted to know what their distinct priorities were as it related to these campuses. And so that's where you start to see these kind of high need, moderate need, low need columns start to come into play for each of those entities, for them to say, you know, this looks great, but we would actually say, you know, Andrews actually needs a bunch of trees and we're looking to do that in the next couple of years. And so the idea is that we pull all of this together and at the end of it can create kind of a 10-year plan to say, these are the schools that will be in X, Y, and Z years. This is the infrastructure that's getting installed. This is the entity that will be responsible for that installation, et cetera. So it will allow us to have kind of this scalable model for our green school park program. So it's kind of taking this very specific assessment where you're just looking at features and then trying to apply kind of this larger scale systems change framework to how we might actually go about using that data. We won't get into too much more on this, but, you know, happy to chat about how we want to, you know, approaching those funders, et cetera, kind of separately, if that seems like it's a need in other cities. Anne also mentioned park disparity and being with the Parks Department. This obviously was struck my eye on my site visits. At the top, you can see this is from Odom Elementary. So it's got this beautiful nature-themed playscape on these great new limestone blocks. It's a really well-maintained site. It's not the case at every site that we went to. And so you can see some examples of how that may not be the case. The bench at the bottom may have been fine when it was installed 10 years ago, but you can see that the ground has completely worn away at the bottom. You know, that's a big hazard right there. It's got some graffiti on it. Signs were a really big issue. Some of our schools had new signs. Some of our schools had these very outdated signs that don't probably have the correct information on them anymore. Other sites didn't have any signs at all, which, you know, being a joint use site is really important for the community to understand that they're welcome to go into that space during that out of school time, and that this is their park to use. And so after we did our initial assessment, we actually went back and did a reassessment specific to park features for all of those sites, because it was such a distinct disparity between different campuses. What we found really echoed what was seen in the Parks and Rec long range plan, which was put together just a year ago, showing that, you know, parks throughout Austin have some disparities depending on where they are, but it really seems to be most prevalent, unfortunately, in our school parks. And so as the Parks Department, we really want to make sure that we're addressing this head on, and have since taken this data and are trying to figure out how we can bring all of these sites to be equal in terms of the amenities that are provided from a park standpoint. Is that waste receptacles? Is that pet waste? Is that a playground? Is that mowing? You know, what does that look like, so that we have some consistency across all of these sites? So that actually leads us to the fact that, you know, we've gone through this whole presentation on who our partners were, how we developed our tool, you know, how we are actually trying to use the data from that assessment moving forward. We'd love to spend some time on reflection. So we're going to open that Jamboard back up, and I will switch to this on the screen, so that you can start to think through how you might implement something like this within your own school or within your own district or city. And so we do have a prompt here on our Jamboard that says, how do you envision implementing an assessment like this in your area? You can start to think about very kind of finite pieces of this. So who might the partners be? What might that tool look like? So what are the different categories that you would want to make sure to include? It might be the bigger picture of why am I trying to do this at my school or at my district? How might I use that data moving forward? But we did want to provide some time for you guys to have some reflection on actually implementing something. Can be challenging with thinking about, okay, now what? This is great information, but how do I apply it within my own work? So we'll give you a couple of minutes to start to think through that, and can read out some of those notes. And can you put the link in the chat again also, so folks have access to that again?
Yep, I just dropped it in. There was also a question on the previous page of the Jamboard about how people might be able to connect with others in their area. And so as you click on the sticky note and type in how you think you might use this, please type what your area is on the sticky note. And I think it would be helpful to get a sense of who's coming from where, and then perhaps Sarah can help with connecting the dots if there are folks that, if there's some connections that are made here for collaboration.
Yep, I'd be happy to connect anyone through this call, so no problem.
I think while we wait to have some envisioning ideas come onto the Jamboard, there were some questions that came up in the chat that I know that we answered there, but just wanted to give a little airtime for the recording. So there was a question about whether this work has been limited to elementary schools, and Essentially, yes, because all of our joint use sites except one are elementary. So we did assess one middle school, and in the district, we have done a less thorough assessment of all of our schools, and that's including middle and high school. And that's just a spreadsheet with a checkoff box of like, do you have a pond? Yes or no. We didn't go into the detail of whether it's used, what state is it in. So we really have a baseline for all of the schools, and then this more in-depth assessment was done at just those joint use sites, which were all elementary and one middle. And then thank you for the idea about Austin Water. We work really closely with watershed protection, and in fact I saw one of our friends from watershed protection as a participant today. So we love working with them, and definitely love the idea to reach out to Austin Water. And there was a legal question that I had asked for some clarification. This person's district, the legal department is not accepting grant money for outdoor spaces for reasons of safety and maintenance. And that has not been an issue for us. The district, the Board of Trustees signed a sustainability, what is it called? I just had a total mind blank. They signed a thing years ago saying that sustainability is a priority for the district. I can't think of what the word is for what they signed. And so we have an environmental stewardship advisory committee and some pretty robust nature goals. And in addition, learning takes place from the sidewalk to the school and in the classroom, and the outdoor spaces are extensions of the indoor classroom. It's embraced by academics and valued as a space where learning takes place, and by the state, depending on the grade, 40 to 60% of science time should be spent doing field and lab investigations. So they can't do that if they don't have a space outside that they can be really engaging in effectively. So I'm not sure that that's helpful, Kimberly, but perhaps there are some points of case making for you that might be helpful.
There is another question in the chat, Anne, which is, I'm curious how you measured school capacity to maintain certain features that the Parks Department would not be responsible for, such as vegetable gardens, etc.
I'll let Melody answer that one.
Maintenance is a disaster. I'll just say it. It always is. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what feature is getting installed. It is inevitably the Achilles heel of the project. And unfortunately, when it comes to funding things, people love to spend money on stuff, but they don't love to spend money on making sure that stuff stays around. And that has been consistently one of our biggest challenges. For these joint use sites, again, since that's where we started, basically the joint use agreement outlines which entity is responsible for which feature. And it basically follows the rule of thumb of if you install it, you maintain it. So if the park system is putting in trash cans and a track and whatever else, the Parks Department is responsible for keeping track of that. If a garden is going in because a teacher planted it, the school is responsible for maintaining that garden. And so that generally that's how it plays out. Of course, every school is nuanced, but that typically is the way it follows. Mm-hmm.
We also have approval processes in place when new things get installed. So on these joint use sites, well, on any AISD site, if a school is wanting to put in a garden or plant trees or a pond or whatever green schoolyard feature it is, they have to submit a schoolyard improvement application so that for district review and approval. And they don't approve the project. It's the principal's job to approve a project, but they approve the location. So, you know, we have a lot of utilities, there are future bond projects, there are portables, there's all kinds of stuff going on site that there are drainage fields. So many people want to put wildflower meadows and gardens in the drainage fields, and there are city requirements we have to follow. So anyways, the point is that also helps because they're getting eyes from the district, and then at these joint use sites, they also have to get approval from the city. And so we get a sense of what's going in and what maintenance it might require, and can sometimes provide connections to community partners or other areas of support for that work, because we all want to see this work succeed.
Yeah, I would just add really quick, and I think this will dovetail with the last question that just came in, which says if a school installs a garden, is it on them to maintain it over the summer? And sort of in short, yes. And that is something that we're talking about right now. Since we've wrapped up all this assessment work, we're really talking about, okay, but realistically, and especially now that we're, you know, rapidly approaching the end of the year and we're getting into summer, and that's really when things kind of fall apart. How do we build stewardship? And so there's a couple of things. One thing, during the assessment process, I wouldn't say we necessarily specifically measured the capacity of a campus to maintain, but we did get information about the interest in maintaining and whether things are maintained currently and by who. And so then we could kind of figure out, well, where are the gaps? What do they need? And then we also were able to compare that to, as Ann mentioned earlier, we have a couple of campuses that on their own, without any, before Green School Parks was an initiative, have a green school campus, are known for it. And what did they do differently? Why is it so successful there? Resources in the community are a big one. And that's why equity is so at the forefront of our minds when we're talking about this. But also, you know, a well-integrated system of this is considered part of being in that school community. When you go to at Gillette Elementary School, for example, which has a beautiful, super well-integrated green school park that was totally school and community driven. It's on the first day, the parents sign up for helping to maintain. The classroom maintains their own individual garden that they use every single day, and parents also sign up to be part of that. So obviously that presents a big challenge to a lot of campuses. And so but we have that information to see, well, what makes it possible? And then how do we fill in those gaps as well? So I'd say we do have a pretty good understanding of individual campuses' capacity to maintain. And part of the sort of agreements that we've been working on is that if you want these features, there's an agreement to maintain it. How you do that is sort of up to you, and we can help you with, resources. We can help you with volunteers. At Austin Parks Foundation, we have a big volunteer base. Like, we can bring volunteers there. We can help recruit a park adopter there. So those are kind of the ways that we can plug in those things depending on the campus. And we understand that not every campus is in a position to just have every parent get involved in the garden at school. And so how do we help mitigate that?
I think to Kathleen's point too, that's where a lot of our partners come into play, specifically around gardens, because it's just such a common challenge. There are groups that come in and work with the schools and the teachers throughout the year to try and build that comfort in being in that space. And then we have some, I guess, youth building capacity organizations and entities and programs. And part of our next step is to try and figure out that long-term plan of sustainability for these spaces. And how do we tap into groups that already exist that are doing some of this work, that maybe we can provide some, additional job training so that, we've got pairing high school students with an elementary campus that's in their neighborhood, and they're taking ownership of that space while also receiving job training, while also getting paid, through the summer to help out in that garden. And so trying to look at kind of the bigger picture of some of these things has been important for us as conversation progresses, especially now that we've wrapped up the tool itself, which took a surprising amount of time just for 22 sites. you know, looking at that future of, okay, we see that there's a huge gap still with maintenance. How can we start to chip away at addressing what that looks like?
We had another question in the chat that I just want to give voice to for sake of the recording. Tony asks, Houston ISD has a lot of green space. I would like to hear if anyone here is working with Houston ISD. Yes, we have, so this group, Anne, Kathleen, and Melody all work with the Austin Cities Connecting Children to Nature initiative. We also have a Houston Cities Connecting Children to Nature initiative, and Resilient Schoolyards is, I think it's Resilient School Communities is what they call theirs, and it is very much similar to what Austin ISD is doing. Becky Lumen is on the call today, and she is working very closely with that group. And so Tony, if you and Becky in the chat want to connect with each other and give each other your contact information, otherwise, you know, we definitely are looking at cities beyond Austin in the state as well.
I'm sort of curious to know if anybody outside of Austin, obviously, in your city, is there something like a joint use agreement for your parks? Because I kind of feel like it's unique, but I really don't know, because I've only been in the parks world in Austin. But I think that access, the joint use agreement is a wonderful thing. It's not perfect, but it is meant to create access to green space, because AISD has a lot of land. Parks Department has a lot of land, but there's, you know, lots of areas of Austin that are park deficient. So opening up those campuses and promoting the use of those campuses really gives people access. That's a big part of the work that we do. But I imagine that there's a lot of cities where schools have this green space and then it's kind of locked down. Not sure if it's utilized during the day, but not by the community. And I think that's a really important facet of it, is that it's used by the school, but also used by the community and out of school time.
Yeah, we've got a few cities in Texas that have joint use agreements. Another big city that has joint use agreements, well, Houston ISD does, so does Fort Worth ISD. Some of the smaller ISDs also have joint use agreements. We'll have some partners joining us for the evening session that are from Kaboom, and they have been doing a lot of work in that area as well. So yeah.
Cool.
I just have to say that from the district perspective, this assessment was an idea. The original assessment that we did with all of our campuses was an idea through our Environmental Stewardship Advisory Committee about 5 years ago. And that was also a subcommittee of people who called or went to every school and just, it was like, do you have vegetable gardens? Do you have a pond? And we kind of amorphously thought that it would be helpful to have this data. And now to be able to say, we have this data, COVID hit, we have these schools that don't have any outdoor classrooms, or we learned that 71 schools have ponds, which means that there may be plants to give to other schools, fish, there may be needs for professional learning, et cetera. And so the assessments, I refer to them every day in my work as a district employee, whether it's through Green School Parks or for ESAC or in my department itself, or a partner is looking for schools in a certain neighborhood that have chickens, whatever it is, it's something that I look at every day. And so I really highly recommend that, you know, if you all are considering it and have a team of folks that can help you, particularly if you're in a larger district like ours, it's been revolutionary for my work, knowing what our schools have and what they need. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Our emails are here if you have any follow-up questions, and should you like to hear us speak again, we'll be doing this again at 7 o'clock tonight.
Yes, thank you so much.
Again.
Thank you so much, Kathleen, Anne, and Melody. We really appreciate your time today. just a couple housekeeping things before we finish up. We did record today's session, so it will be available via our YouTube channel, and I will email all of that out along with information with the assessment tomorrow. It will also have a evaluation in that email, so if you could please take a few moments to fill out our evaluation, that would be really helpful. Right now, we are in the middle of planning our webinars for the fall, and one of the questions is, what would you like to see? So hearing from you all about what you would like to hear from us in these webinars is super helpful. And then our next monthly webinar is going to be on April 7th, and it is going to be on the state of K-12 environmental education with EcoRise. And so we are really looking forward to that webinar as well. And thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.